welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a custom Tetra doll as part of a collaboration I joined on the Stockbox Discord. We were supposed to make a doll without using an Ever After or Monster High doll, so I'll be using a Boxy girl for my base. I wasn't sure which doll to use, and after looking at my Legend of Zelda encyclopedia, I decided the lighter doll would be easier. After all, it's usually simpler to darken a skin tone than it is to lighten it. Before I get started, here are all of the dolls created for the collab. Everyone is tagged in the description below. The first thing to do is to prep the doll for customizing. I removed her face off camera with acetone, then I work on removing her hair. I use my little scissors and try to cut as close to the scalp as I can. I salvage what I can of the cut hair to use on a future project. I didn't really want to remove her head if I didn't need to, so I tried to use my X-Acto blade to shave off the rest of her hair. It wasn't really working, and it was taking way too much time, and I ended up needing to remove her head anyway and use the tried and true scraping the head out with a screwdriver method. So looking at my little collectible figure, we can see that Tetra's head is very round. My Boxy girl, being a box-headed doll, has a very flat face, so I'm going to attempt to round her face out a bit. I have this air-dry clay. I have no idea what it's called. I took it out of the box and threw the packaging away. I've used it for over a year, and I just call it cold porcelain because it gets really cold as it dries. It can be 90 degrees in the room, and it will still be cold to the touch as it cures. For reshaping her head, I add bits of the clay and smooth it out with water as I go. I continue to add snakes and balls of clay to her face until I have the shape that I want. I try to ease the transition between the clay and the plastic by smoothing it out with water. I noticed when looking at my Tetra figurine that she doesn't have very much of a figure. She's very barrel-chested, so while I have my cold clay out, I work on filling out her waist. It's very similar to before. I just lay the clay on the doll and smooth it out with water. I check that her arms can move freely as I work because I don't want to inhibit her movement at all. Before the clay is completely dry, I reattach her head to the body because any further sculpting I do will run the risk of falling off or cracking with pressure. Anytime you flex the vinyl, the clay might pop off, and this is fixable with glue, but I really didn't want to do that at this phase. Once the head is back on, I start shaping her Hylian ears. I usually put a wire armature inside of the ears, but I decided not to this time. The ears were pretty close to her head, and the clay isn't super heavy. It's not as heavy as epoxy sculpt, so I'm not that worried about it falling off. I push the clay onto her human ears and smooth out a triangular shape. I keep adding and smoothing until it gets the right size. For the details, I use clay tools and just scrape out the general shape of the inside of her ear. Ears can be kind of complicated, so it's a good idea to look at photo references. I didn't really do that, and it probably shows. wanted her to have articulated elbows. So I cut 2 small pieces out of an old wire hanger to create the crossbars that will go into her arms. I'm using the method that Dollightful uses in her Sakura video to add new joints. I do recommend watching the Sakura video because it has far better instructions than I have here. I use wire cutters and carefully cut her arms off. Once detached, I use my rotary tool to carve a notch into her lower arms. Be careful and go slowly if you try this. The footage here is sped up and a lot of what I'm doing is just small pieces done at a time. Once I'm happy with the notches, I drill a small hole perpendicular to them for the crossbar to slide into. These need to be pretty tight or they might fall out while posing the arms. I also drill a hole into her upper arm for the finished peg to go into. I didn't have a very thick or sturdy wire, so I took one of my smaller, stronger wires and cut it about 4 times the length that I'm going to need. I twist this wire together to strengthen it, then I fold it and twist it again. Now it's thick enough to stay inside the arm without falling out. It did take quite a bit of finessing to get this wire pulled through, and that's okay because it needs to be tight. And now I shape it into something like a shepherd's hook so that it can fit around the crossbar and hold on to it. This allows the arm to rotate up and down. I cut the wire to length and insert it into the upper arm. This was the first time I've attempted this, and I'm pretty happy with the added movement, but I will be using different wire next time. One thing about the Boxy girls is their legs are very, very long compared to their torsos, and Tetra is quite stout. So I wanted to shorten her overall so that she was a little bit more accurate. I am going for an adult Tetra here. This is Tetra after she knows she's Princess Zelda and she's a little taller and more developed. Her character design will be slightly different, but she was just way, 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 way too tall. So I mark a section off of her leg and I use my rotary tool to cut it off. I actually saved the little pieces that I take out just in case I want to make another doll taller in the future. And as I'm testing her height, her face fell off. This is totally normal with air dry clay. It shrinks a bit as it dries, and it just finished drying at this point. So I just glue it back on with Elmer's Glue All. I pour it onto the back of the clay and I smooth it out with a brush. I didn't want there to be any major clumps on her face from the glue, so I do my best to even out the brush strokes. In order to strengthen her legs, I drill a hole into the ends. I insert a piece of floral wire to use as a structural base and to reattach her feet. Off camera, I fill the space around the wire using hot glue. I smooth out the transition with more cold porcelain, and while I was at it, I noticed that her thighs were super stick-like. My mother was actually watching me sculpt her, and she suggested that I give Tetra a bit more developed thighs, and I think it helped her a lot not seem so childlike. She didn't quite feel so long and tall after I was done. As I'm working, I'm constantly checking her movement and making sure that I'm not blocking any joints. Once I'm done sanding the clay and cleaning up the edges, I do my best to mix a match for her skin tone with watered down acrylic paint. I don't get it exactly right, but that's okay because I'm going to be doing a lot of blushing later. For now, I just want to ease the transition between the white clay and her body. I do several coats and let them dry in between. After the paint is dry, I go in with my Jane Davenport pastels. They look a lot like a makeup set, but they're actually really good art pastels. I also got some applicators to go with them. They're kind of like Q-tips, but they're reusable and they help so much when you need to apply smooth layers or a lot of pastels at once. Once I'm happy with the color of her skin, I move on to the face-up, and I'm just using my Derwent Inktense watercolor pencils here to sketch the outline of her face. I had done a base layer of Liquitex matte varnish and it was not taking the pencils very well. So I had already started her face but had to quickly switch over to MSC Usually this works just fine, but for some reason it gave me a lot of trouble on this doll. When I'm initially sketching, I try to make corrections as I go. I tend to use pretty strong colors, and I have a relatively simplified and cartoony art style, so it's not really a big deal to me if a line is a little messy because I usually go back in with paint or a lot of thick black eyeliner and clean things up around the eyes later. For the eyes, I use pastels because my Inktense pencils tend to run very dark. I have some lighter shades in the Arteza set that I have, but I really wanted to try this new chilled palette that I got from Jane Davenport as well. I switched back and forth between the birthday suit set and the chilled set to further contour her face. I laid down a layer of white pencil for her eyebrows. Because she has a dark skin tone, yellow will not show up very well. A white base layer helps the pigment show up a lot more. I seal my progress and use pastels for her eyebrows. This way I can clean up the shape without damaging the rest of my work. This is layer 2, and I am just making dark areas more rich and outlining her irises. The eyes are really my favorite part of any character art. It just helps bring everything to light. You can see here that I had an issue with her face. Whenever the clay fell off of her and I glued it back, it created a crevice around the seams of the clay. So she has this odd line of wrinkles that goes all around her head. And it works a little with the idea that she's an older Tetra, but it drove me crazy working on her. I could have gone back over it and sculpted epoxy at this point, but I was really hoping that as I built up layers with MSC and pastels that it would kind of fill it in. And it does a little bit. It's not quite so noticeable near the end of the face-up as it is at this moment. For the style of the eyes, I wanted to go for something that's a little more reminiscent of Ocarina of Time. I was thinking of Princess Zelda, where she has the sharp wing liner on the top and the bottom. When I'm drawing an anime character, I always give them nostrils. So even though it's not very accurate to the game that she's from, I just had to give them to her. My personal preference for style also has very heavy eyelids, so even though Wind Waker doesn't have super defined features, I just had to add them to my doll. This is more of me just trying to fill in her brow wrinkles, and it's not working. She's got some bags under her eyes. I'm using some of the lighter shades from my Arteza pencils and adding more highlights, contouring her nose, her cheeks, and picking up the pinks of her lips a little more. And it's time for that single bottom eyelash a la Ocarina of Time. You can see her wrinkles aren't so deep here. I think I did okay filling them in. I'm getting some Rust-Oleum filler primer for my next doll, just in case something like this happens again. Other than completely resculpting her face, let me know if you guys have any suggestions on how to avoid something like this in the future. I'm definitely still learning and picking up new techniques wherever I can. Once I'm happy with the color range from my pencils, I go in with OoaK acrylics for the brightest areas. I just like having these pre-mixed colors in the bottle. It's so convenient, and if I can skip mixing my own colors, I will. It saves a lot of time. I feel like having a color palette that you return to lends toward having a style, because then you have something consistent and recognizable within your art. Clean up that little white spot where I went outside of her eye off camera with a black pencil. And the face up is done. To make the hair for Tetra, I unravel some yarn and I just tug on the ends to pull the fiber out and get the maximum length. I learned this from a video by Dorian the Elf, and I will link that in the description below. Flat iron the pulled fibers and glue them to a piece of parchment paper to make the wefts. Once the wefts are dry and trimmed, I start gluing them to the head. I honestly had no idea what I was doing with her hair. This is only the second doll that I've ever glued the hair directly to the head, and it was terrifying. I'm used to rerouting for most of my dolls, but her head was so hard, and it wasn't something I thought I could do without destroying the sculpting of the ears. And just like her face fell off, I also had to re-glue her ears on earlier. So typically when you're gluing on wefts of the doll, you want to work in the opposite of the direction that the hair is going to lay in the end. Tell me if I'm talking too much, because this is my first doll customizing video, so I don't really know what I'm doing. If my camera angle's bad, if my voice is too grating, which I really can't change, you know, but I'm trying to learn. Fill in the back of her head just enough to hide her scalp. I don't want to make it bulky because she has this weird twisty bun on top of her head, and even though I'm not going to match it exactly, I do want to capture the essence of her character design. For her sideburns, they're kind of like lightning bolts. I drew the design on paper and I cut it out. Then I glued small pieces of the wefts that I made earlier to the cutout paper. And I kept going until it was thick enough to hide the paper. Once the lightning bolts were dry, I glued them to the sides of her head. And yes, they are backwards. That was an accident. Once everything was dried, I put her hair in a high ponytail and tried styling it. This gave me a little bit of trouble. I have a better idea of how to do this now after watching some other doll customizers videos, but for what I knew at the time, I think I did okay. I trim her bangs to shape that sharp little piece that hangs down in front. I'm basing the design of her clothes off of her design in Wind Waker, but I want to embellish it a little bit. I took the hemmed bottom of a damaged shirt and I cut it to be like a little tube top for her. In the original child version, Tetra is actually wearing a tank top underneath of her vest, so I'm going for something similar here. I sew on some hook clasps after cutting the fabric down to width. I glue the ribbon straps on with some Fabri-Tac. There won't be a lot of pressure on her straps, so I don't need very much to hold them in place. For her scarf, I took a stretchy piece of red knit fabric and cut it down to a square that will fit just around her neck. I based the pants pattern off of a pattern I had for Monster High dolls because their waists are similar sizes. I had to make quite a few modifications, however. They worked out pretty nicely in the end. Let me know if you'd like the pattern. I don't think I modified her hips, so they should fit regular Boxy girls. Pants are kind of interesting to sew because you have to go up the leg and to the crotch and then stop. Then switch to the other side and then sew the crotches together, but then sew the seams for the outside of the leg, and it's not very intuitive at all. But I've done enough pants and leggings from my Monster High dolls that it just kind of makes sense without instructions for me to do now. I took some scrap fabric from cutting the scarf out and I made the waist sash. I just tied it in place. The vest is a piece of an old jersey. A lot of my fabrics are just recycled clothes and things that my family gives me that I can't use because they don't fit or they're really out of date or they're damaged and they would just get thrown away otherwise. So I try to recycle fabrics where I can. Her vest was far more simple to make than her pants were. It's just a single piece pattern that's sewn down the sides. The armpits are very tiny though, and I was not about to try to hem them with thread, so I just used Fabri-Tac to clean the edges up. For her shoes, I had this pair that came with the doll originally, but my daughter took them and hid them because she liked them. Eventually, I got her to trade me. I cut the little round bumps off and paint the shoes brown. I was trying to match Tetra's original sandals without straight up making them sandals. Add some paint embellishments in the vein of some of the older Zelda games. I really like the repeating triangle designs in some of the villagers' clothing in Kakariko Village, and this was heavily inspired by that. Bandana wasn't holding the knot that it needed, so I just took a teeny tiny little ball tie and wrapped it in front of the knot so it had a nice little bump. Once her shoes were dry, I coated them in Mod Podge to prevent the paint from chipping. I cannot wait to dress a doll until it's done, so I always dress a doll as I'm making it. I just really like seeing things come together. I had sculpted these small accessories previously, so they had a few days to dry. These are her earrings, and the triangle with the notch taking out of it is her piece of the Triforce like you find at the end of the game. To make the arm wraps, I took a scrap of white cotton and cut it into strips and wrapped them around her arms. I wanted everything to be as removable as possible. I tend not to want to sew or glue things onto my dolls if I can help it, so for her arm wraps, I just glued the final strip to itself, so if I wanted to, I could just slide them off of her arms to remove them.
The accessories are made with Crayola Model Magic, so they're pretty soft for several days after the clay dries. You can run a needle and thread through it very easily. I like to do this when making earrings and accessories. I glued her earrings straight to her ears, which I really didn't want to do. I struggled with it for quite a while, but I also really didn't want to drill holes through her clay ears either. I glossed her eyes and her lips. I coated the sword in Mod Podge to protect it, but I did not coat the medallion and the Triforce earrings in anything other than gloss because I didn't want to lose that metallic look of the paint. It doesn't show very well in the video, but it's actually quite shiny in real life. And with that, she's done. She gave me a lot of problems, but overall, she's actually one of my more favorite dolls that are in my collection. I like the idea that Tetra finds out that she's Princess Zelda and she comes back to being a pirate because that's who she always was. So this is post-Wind Waker Princess Zelda going back to her adventure and sailing the seas. Hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more. Bye!